The woman's silhouette against the setting sun made Preston Lyle's hand freeze on his rifle as he approached his own stable, wondering who dared to enter his property uninvited in this corner of Colorado territory in 1878. He had been a solitary man for 28 years, keeping to himself on his modest ranch 3 miles outside Trinidad, never seeking company and certainly never expecting to find a stranger in his barn at dusk. The light spilling through the stable doors cast long shadows across the dusty ground, and Preston moved quietly, his boots making soft sounds on the packed earth. He could hear a voice now, low and melodic, speaking words he could not quite make out. When he stepped through the doorway, Preston saw her clearly for the first time. She stood beside his stallion Thunder, her hand on the horse's dark neck, her lips moving as she whispered something that made the usually temperamental animal stand perfectly still. Her dress was worn and dusty from travel, the hem torn in places, and her dark blonde hair fell loose around her shoulders. She could not have been more than 23 or 24, and there was something fragile about her despite the straight way she held herself. "That horse does not let strangers touch him," Preston said, keeping his voice level despite his surprise. She turned quickly, her eyes wide with alarm. They were green, he noticed, the color of new spring grass. Her hand remained on Thunder's neck, and the horse made no move to pull away or show the aggression Preston had come to expect from him. "I am sorry," she said, her voice carrying a slight tremor. "I did not mean to trespass. I was walking and I heard him. He seemed distressed." Preston looked at Thunder, who appeared more calm than he had in weeks. The stallion had been injured in a fall 2 months prior, and though the leg had healed, the horse had remained skittish and difficult to handle. Preston had not been able to ride him since. "What were you saying to him?" Preston asked, lowering his rifle completely now that he could see she posed no threat. The woman's hand moved gently along Thunder's neck. "Just words, quiet words. My father taught me that horses understand tone more than anything else. They know when you mean them no harm." "Your father a rancher?" Something passed across her face, a shadow of pain. "He was. He died 6 months ago in Kansas. Our ranch was sold to pay debts." Preston moved closer, watching how Thunder responded to her presence. The horse's ears were forward, relaxed. "You have been traveling since then?" "Yes." She dropped her hand from the horse and took a step back, as if suddenly remembering she was uninvited. "I should go. I truly am sorry for entering without permission. Where are you going?" The question came out before Preston could stop it, before he could remind himself that he preferred solitude, that he had built his life around avoiding complications. She hesitated. "I am not certain. I have been looking for work. I can cook, clean, tend animals. I thought perhaps in Trinidad someone might need help, but the women I spoke to in town said there was nothing." Preston knew why. Trinidad was growing, but it remained a rough place where single women without family were viewed with suspicion. The respectable families would not hire her without references, and the saloons would offer only one kind of employment that he could see she would never accept. "What is your name?" he asked, Grace Sterling. "Preston Lyle." He gestured around the stable. "I have 6 horses, 2 dozen cattle, and chickens that need tending. The house has not been properly cleaned in more than a year. I can offer you work if you want it. There is a small room off the kitchen that you can use. Wages would be fair." Grace's eyes searched his face, and Preston could see her weighing the risk. A young woman alone with a strange man on an isolated ranch was a dangerous proposition. He was aware of how this looked, how improper it would be considered. "I am not offering anything except work," he said quietly. "You would have your own space, your own lock on the door. I keep to myself. I just need help running this place." Why? She asked. Why would you offer this to a stranger? Preston looked at Thunder, who had moved closer to Grace as if drawn to her presence. Any woman who can calm that horse in under 5 minutes is someone I would be a fool not to hire. And I am many things, but I try not to be a fool. Grace was silent for a long moment. Preston could see her exhaustion in the way she held herself, the slight sway of her body. She probably had not eaten well in days. There is stew left from supper, he added. You can eat, rest for the night, and decide in the morning if you want to stay. All right, she said finally. Thank you, Mr. Lyle. Preston is fine. He led her from the stable to the house, a simple structure he had built himself over the course of 2 years. It was sturdy but sparse, containing only what was necessary. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a stone fireplace on one wall and a rough-hewn table in the center. His bedroom was through one door, and the small room he had mentioned was through another, originally intended for storage but now mostly empty. Grace stood in the doorway, taking it all in. Preston ladled stew into a bowl and set it on the table with a chunk of bread. She sat slowly, as if uncertain this was real, and began to eat. She tried to go slowly, he could tell, but her hunger won out and she finished the bowl quickly. Thank you, she said again. The room is through there. Preston indicated the door. There are blankets in the chest. I will be up early to tend the animals. If you decide to stay, you can join me. If not, I will give you supplies for the road. He left her then, retiring to his own room and lying awake for a long time listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person in his house. He had lived alone since he was 21, when he left his father's ranch in Texas after one too many beatings. He had drifted north, working where he could, until he had saved enough to buy this land and start over. He spoke little, worked hard, and kept his distance from the people of Trinidad. They thought him strange, he knew, but they left him alone, which was what he wanted. Or what he had wanted until tonight, until he saw a woman with green eyes whispering to his horse and making the animal believe in gentleness again. Morning came cold and clear. Preston rose before dawn as always and went outside to begin his work. He was surprised to find Grace already in the stable, standing beside Thunder with a brush in her hand, working through the tangles in the horse's mane. She had changed into a simpler dress, still worn but cleaner, and had tied her hair back with a strip of fabric. You are up early, Preston said. I am used to it. Ranches do not run themselves. He moved to the next stall where his mare, Bess, waited. You decided to stay then. If the offer still stands. Grace did not look at him, keeping her attention on Thunder. I need the work and you seem like an honest man. Those are hard to find. The offer stands. They worked in comfortable silence, tending each horse, feeding the chickens, checking the cattle in the near pasture. Grace moved with practiced efficiency, knowing without being told what needed doing. When they returned to the house for breakfast, Preston made coffee and fried eggs while Grace sliced bread. Tell me about the ranch, she said as they ate. How long have you been here? 7 years. I bought the land cheap because the previous owner gave up after a hard winter. Built the house and the stable myself. It is not much, but it is mine. It is more than most have. Grace's voice carried a wistfulness that made Preston glance at her. You miss your father's ranch. Every day. We had a good life there before he got sick. After my mother died when I was 16, it was just the two of us. He taught me everything about running a ranch, treating animals, reading the weather. He used to say I had better instincts than most men he knew. She smiled slightly. That did not help much when the bank came calling. No family to go to, none that would take me in. My mother's family disowned her when she married my father. They thought he was beneath her. And my father's family all passed years ago. Preston understood that kind of isolation. Well, you have work here as long as you want it. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that surprised Preston with its ease. Grace proved to be everything she had claimed. She cooked well, kept the house cleaner than it had ever been, and showed remarkable skill with the animals. Thunder responded to her like a different horse entirely, and within a week, she had him calm enough that Preston could ride him again. "How did you do that?" Preston asked one evening as they watched the sunset from the porch. It had become a habit, these quiet moments at day's end, sitting on the two chairs Preston had built and never expected anyone else to use. "I told you. My father taught me. But it is more than technique. Animals know when you carry anger or fear. They feel it in your hands, hear it in your voice. You have to approach them with peace in your heart." "I am not angry," Preston said, though even as the words left his mouth he knew they were not entirely true. Grace looked at him with those perceptive green eyes. "Everyone is angry about something, Preston. The question is whether you let it control you." He wanted to ask what she was angry about, what loss and hardship had shaped her, but the words stuck in his throat. He was not accustomed to personal conversations, to sharing the thoughts he kept locked away. So instead he said nothing, and they sat in silence until the stars came out. 2 weeks after Grace arrived, Preston rode into Trinidad for supplies. He went to the general store where he usually traded, nodding at the proprietor, Samuel Watts, who regarded him with curious eyes. "Heard you took in a woman," Samuel said as he measured out flour. "That true?" Preston kept his voice neutral. "I hired help for the ranch. Folks are talking, saying it is not proper, a single woman living out there with you. Folks should mind their own business." Samuel held up his hands. "Not judging, Preston, just telling you what is being said. You know how people are in a small town." Preston paid for his supplies and left, irritation prickling at him. He should have expected this. Trinidad was growing, but it remained a place where everyone knew everyone else's affairs, and where a woman like Grace was vulnerable to vicious gossip. When he returned to the ranch, Grace was working in the garden plot she had started near the house, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil. She looked up as he approached, and he could see the question in her eyes. "People are talking in town," he said without preamble. "About you being here." Grace's face tightened. "I see. It does not matter to me what they say, but I thought you should know." She stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "It matters to me. I did not come here to ruin your reputation or my own. If my presence is causing problems, I can leave." "No." The word came out more forcefully than Preston intended. He realized in that moment how much he had come to rely on her presence, not just for the work she did, but for the life she brought to the empty spaces of his home. "You are not the problem. Their small-mindedness is. Small-mindedness can be dangerous, especially for a woman alone." Preston met her eyes. "You are not alone. Not anymore." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of a connection that had been growing quietly over the past weeks. Grace looked away first, but not before Preston saw the flush rise in her cheeks. "We should get back to work," she said softly. That night, Preston lay awake thinking about Grace, about the way she moved through the world with quiet strength, about the gentleness in her hands and the steel in her spine. He thought about how the house felt different now, warmer somehow, and how he found himself looking forward to meals and evening conversations. He thought about things he had convinced himself he did not want: companionship, partnership, love. It was dangerous territory for a man who had built his life around solitude. The following Sunday, Grace asked if she might attend church in Trinidad. Preston did not go himself, having long ago abandoned organized religion, but he hitched the wagon and drove her into town. He waited outside while she went in, watching the way the other women looked at her. their eyes full of judgment and whispered speculation. When Grace emerged, her face was composed, but he could see the hurt underneath. She said nothing as they drove back, and Preston felt anger rising in him at those righteous women who had made her feel unwelcome. "You do not have to go back there," he said finally. "I wanted to pray. I wanted to feel part of a community again." Her voice was small. "But you are right. I do not think I will go back." "Their loss," Preston said gruffly. "You are worth 10 of any of those women." Grace turned to him with surprise. "That is kind of you to say." "It is not kind. It is true." When they reached the ranch, Grace placed her hand briefly on Preston's arm before climbing down from the wagon. The touch burned through his shirt sleeve, and he found himself wanting to reach for her, to pull her close and promise that he would not let anyone hurt her. But he did not. He simply watched her walk into the house, and then he tended to the horses, trying to sort through the tangle of feelings in his chest. Summer deepened into August, bringing heat that shimmered across the grasslands. Preston and Grace worked side by side, their partnership becoming more seamless with each passing day. They talked more now, sharing stories of their pasts. Grace told him about growing up on the Kansas ranch, about her mother's love of music and her father's patient teaching. Preston found himself sharing things he had never told anyone: his father's cruelty, his years of drifting, the loneliness that had driven him to this isolated place. "You ever regret it?" Grace asked one evening. "Building a life so far from others?" Preston considered the question. "I used to think this was what I wanted: peace, quiet, no one to answer to. But lately I have been thinking that maybe peace and loneliness are not the same thing." "No," Grace agreed quietly. "They are not." Their eyes met and held. Preston saw something in her gaze that made his heart beat faster, a warmth and longing that he suspected mirrored his own. He wanted to kiss her. The desire was overwhelming, sudden, and terrifying. "Grace," he started, not knowing what he intended to say, but she stood quickly. "I should get supper started." She disappeared into the house, and Preston sat alone, cursing himself for being a coward. The next morning brought trouble. Preston was working with thunder in the corral when he saw riders approaching. 3 men, all wearing gun belts and the casual arrogance of those who were used to taking what they wanted. Preston recognized the man in front: Wade Carson, who owned a large spread east of Trinidad and had a reputation for intimidating smaller ranchers into selling their land. "Preston Lyle," Wade called out as he reined in his horse. "Been meaning to pay you a visit." "What do you want, Carson?" Preston kept his hand near his own gun, a precaution. "Heard you got a woman living here. Thought I would come see for myself." Wade's eyes scanned the property until they landed on Grace, who had emerged from the stable. His gaze turned predatory. "Well now, the rumors do not do you justice, miss." Grace said nothing, but Preston saw her shoulders tense. "The lady is my employee," Preston said coldly. "And you are trespassing on my land. Easy now." Wade held up his hands in mock surrender. "Just being neighborly. Though I have to say, Lyle, folks in town are mighty curious about your arrangement here. A young, pretty woman living alone with a bachelor makes people wonder about her virtue." Preston's hand moved to his gun. "Get off my property. Now." Wade's expression hardened. "You should be more careful, Lyle. Accidents happen out here. Would be a shame if something happened to your ranch or to your pretty housekeeper." The threat was clear. Preston pulled his gun, leveling it at Wade. "I will not warn you again." Wade and his men backed their horses up, but Wade's eyes promised that this was not over. "See you around, Lyle." When they were gone, Grace came to stand beside Preston. She was trembling slightly. "Will he make good on his threat? Maybe. Wade Carson has been trying to buy up land around here for years. He does not like it when people say no. I should leave. I am putting you in danger." Preston turned to her, his voice fierce. "You are not going anywhere. This is your home now if you want it to be." "Preston, I mean it, Grace. I am not letting Carson or anyone else drive you away." She looked up at him and he saw tears gathering in her eyes. "Why? Why does it matter so much to you?" The truth rose up in Preston, overwhelming and undeniable. "Because I am falling in love with you. Because this ranch stopped being just a place when you arrived and became a home. Because the thought of you leaving feels like losing a part of myself I did not even know I was missing." Grace drew in a sharp breath. "Preston, you do not have to say anything," he interrupted. "I know this is complicated. I know I am just a quiet rancher with not much to offer, but I had to tell you the truth." "You really think you do not have much to offer?" Grace's voice was incredulous. She reached up and touched his face, her palm warm against his cheek. "You gave me safety when I had nothing. You treated me with respect when others saw me as something to be used or dismissed. You made me feel valued again. How can you think that is not everything?" Preston covered her hand with his own. "Grace, I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I have been fighting it because I was afraid this was not real, afraid I would lose it like I have lost everything else, but I am tired of being afraid." He kissed her then, finally giving in to the need that had been building for weeks. Her lips were soft under his, and she kissed him back with a passion that made his knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "We should get married," he said. "Make this proper. Stop the gossip and make sure no one can question your place here." "Is that a proposal, Preston Lyle?" There was humor in her voice, but also tenderness. "It is. I know I should do it better, should get down on one knee and make a pretty speech. But I am not good with words. All I know is that I want you in my life as my wife, my partner. I want to build a future with you." "Yes," Grace said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." They married 3 days later in Trinidad, with Samuel Watts and his wife serving as witnesses. The ceremony was simple, conducted by the minister, who looked somewhat surprised to see the quiet rancher Preston Lyle standing before him with a bride. Grace wore a new dress that Preston had bought for her, simple blue cotton that matched her eyes, and she carried wildflowers that she had picked that morning. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed Grace with a tenderness that made her eyes shine with tears. As they left the church, the townspeople who had gathered to watch whispered among themselves, but Preston did not care. Grace was his wife now, and that was all that mattered. They returned to the ranch together, and that night they consummated their marriage with a sweetness that surprised them both. Preston had known desire before, but this was different. This was about connection, about two lonely people finding solace and joy in each other. Grace was soft and responsive in his arms, and he tried to show her with his body what he struggled to express with words: that she was precious to him, that he would spend his life trying to make her happy. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his bed, which was now their bed. Grace traced patterns on Preston's chest, her head resting on his shoulder. "I never thought I would have this," she said quietly. "After my father died, I thought I would spend my life alone, just trying to survive. I never imagined I would find love, neither did I." Preston kissed the top of her head, "But I am glad I was wrong." The following weeks were the happiest Preston had ever known. He and Grace worked the ranch together, true partners in every sense. She had ideas for improvements, and he listened to her suggestions, implementing many of them. They expanded the garden, bought more chickens, and began planning to increase the cattle herd in the spring. But the shadow of Wade Carson still loomed. A month after the wedding, Preston discovered that someone had cut his fence line, allowing several head of cattle to wander off. It took him 2 days to find and return them. Then the stable door was left open one night, and if not for Grace's light sleeping and her discovery of the open door, they might have lost all the horses. "This is Carson," Preston said grimly. "He is trying to wear us down, make us give up and sell." "We will not," Grace said firmly. "This is our home. We will not let him take it from us." Preston pulled her close, grateful for her strength. "I am going to talk to the sheriff. This has to stop." He rode into Trinidad the next day and found Sheriff Tom Reeves in his office. Tom was a decent man, fair and honest, but he listened to Preston's story with a troubled expression. "The problem is proof," Tom said. "Without catching someone in the act, I cannot do anything about vague suspicions. Wade Carson is powerful in this territory. I cannot accuse him without evidence. So we are supposed to just wait until something worse happens. I will keep my ears open, ask around. If Carson is behind this, maybe someone will talk. In the meantime, be careful, Preston. Watch your back." It was not the answer Preston wanted, but he understood the sheriff's position. He returned home frustrated, but Grace met him with a kiss and a good meal, and somehow that made the situation feel more bearable. Fall arrived, painting the landscape in gold and red. Preston and Grace worked to prepare the ranch for winter, storing food, repairing buildings, and making sure the animals were ready for the cold months ahead. They fell into bed exhausted each night, but always took time to hold each other, to talk about their day, to reaffirm the love that was growing stronger with each passing week. One October evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Grace took Preston's hand and placed it on her stomach. "I am with child," she said softly. "I am fairly certain now." Preston felt his heart expand with a joy so intense it almost hurt. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be. I have been feeling different for a few weeks, and now I am certain. We are going to have a baby, Preston." He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "I am going to be a father." The words felt strange and wonderful. "I never thought, I never imagined, I know." Grace's voice was full of happiness. "But we are going to have a family, a real family." That night they made love with exquisite gentleness, and Preston found himself making silent promises to the child growing inside Grace. He would be a good father, nothing like his own. He would teach his son or daughter about kindness, about hard work, about treating others with respect. He would build a life for this child that was full of love and safety, but the universe seemed determined to test him. 2 weeks later, Preston was working in the far pasture when he heard Grace scream. He ran toward the sound, his heart pounding, and found her outside the stable facing 3 men on horseback. One of them was Wade Carson. "Get away from her," Preston shouted, his hand on his gun. Wade turned to him with a cold smile. "Just having a conversation with your wife, Lyle. Telling her how dangerous ranch life can be. So many accidents that can happen. Last warning, Carson, get off my land, or what? You will shoot me in front of witnesses." Wade gestured to his men. "That would not go well for you." Preston's mind raced. Carson was right. If he shot the man now, even in defense of his property and wife, it could be twisted against him. But he could not just let them intimidate Grace. "I am going to give you one chance to leave peacefully," Preston said, forcing his voice to remain calm. "If anything happens to my wife, to my property, or to me, I have written a letter detailing your threats. It is with my lawyer in Trinidad, with instructions to open it if something goes wrong. Everyone will know you were behind it. It was a bluff." Preston had no lawyer. But Carson did not know that. The other man's eyes narrowed. "You are lying. Try me, see what happens." The standoff stretched for a long moment. Then Wade spat in the dirt and turned his horse. "This is not over, Lyle." When they were gone, Grace collapsed against Preston, shaking. He held her tight, feeling her fear and his own anger warring inside him. We need to actually do what I said, he told her. Write down everything and give it to someone in town. Make it real. All right. Grace pulled back, her face pale but determined. But Preston, what if that is not enough? What if he comes back? Then I will do what I have to do to protect you, to protect our child. That evening, Preston wrote out a detailed account of Carson's threats and harassment. The next morning, he took it to Samuel Watts at the general store. I need you to keep this safe, Preston explained. If anything happens to me or Grace, give it to the sheriff. Samuel took the envelope with solemn eyes. You are serious about this? Dead serious. Wade Carson is dangerous, and I need to make sure there are consequences if he follows through on his threats. I will keep it safe. You have my word. Preston returned home feeling slightly better, but the tension did not leave him. He found himself constantly watching the horizon, waiting for trouble. Grace noticed, and one night she took his hand across the dinner table. You cannot live like this, Preston. We cannot live like this, always afraid. I know, but I do not know what else to do. Carson is not going to stop. Maybe he will if we stand up to him another way. Not with guns and threats, but with community. If other people know what he is doing, if we have witnesses and support, he will have to back down. Preston considered this. You want to tell people in town. I want to stop being afraid. I want to build alliances. We are not the only small ranchers around here. If Carson is willing to intimidate us, he has probably threatened others too. Maybe it is time to band together. It was a good idea, better than sitting here waiting for the next attack. Over the following weeks, Preston reached out to other ranchers in the area. He found that Grace was right. Several of them had experienced similar problems with Wade Carson, though none had been willing to speak up alone. A meeting was organized at the church in Trinidad, and more than a dozen ranchers showed up. They shared their stories, and a picture emerged of systematic intimidation by Carson. Together, they drafted a letter to the territorial governor detailing the harassment and requesting an investigation. Strength in numbers, Grace said as they rode home from the meeting. That is how we win this. Preston squeezed her hand. You are brilliant, you know that, she smiled. I just know that one person can be ignored, but a whole group of people speaking the same truth cannot be dismissed. The territorial governor responded faster than Preston expected. An investigator arrived in Trinidad in late November and spent 2 weeks interviewing ranchers and examining evidence. Wade Carson was forced to answer questions, and while no criminal charges were filed, the scrutiny brought consequences. Several of Carson's business partners distanced themselves from him, and the bank that had been backing his land acquisitions suddenly became less willing to extend credit. The harassment stopped. Carson retreated to his own ranch, his power diminished if not broken. Preston and Grace could finally breathe easy, could focus on preparing for their child without constantly looking over their shoulders. Winter came early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow. Preston made sure the animals were protected and that they had enough supplies to last until spring. Grace grew bigger with the child, and he found himself marveling at the changes in her body, at the life they had created together. I hope it is a boy, Grace said one evening as they sat by the fire, her hand on her swollen belly. A boy with your strength and kindness. I hope for a healthy child, Preston replied. Boy or girl does not matter, as long as you both come through this safely. The fear in his voice must have been apparent because Grace reached for his hand. I will be fine. Women have been having babies forever. That does not make it less dangerous. She kissed him softly. I have you. That makes me feel safe. The baby came in late February during a snowstorm. Preston had ridden to Trinidad 2 days before to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Martha Powell, and he was grateful for her presence as Grace's labor began. He held Grace's hand through the contractions, whispering words of encouragement, trying not to show his terror. "You are doing so well," Martha told Grace. "Not much longer now." Preston felt utterly helpless, watching Grace in pain and being unable to do anything to stop it. But she was strong, stronger than he had ever imagined, and when the baby finally came with a furious wail, Preston felt tears streaming down his face. "A boy," Martha announced, wrapping the baby in clean blankets. "A healthy, strong boy." Preston looked at his son, at the tiny, perfect face and the small hands waving in the air, and felt something shift fundamentally inside him. This was his child, his family, the life he had never thought he would have. Grace held the baby against her chest, exhausted but radiant. What should we name him? Preston thought about all the names he had considered over the past months, but only one felt right. "James, after your father. He taught you everything that makes you the woman you are. I want our son to carry that legacy." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "James Lyle." "It is perfect." The midwife stayed for 3 days to make sure Grace and the baby were doing well, and then she returned to Trinidad, promising to check on them in a few weeks. Preston and Grace were left alone with their son, learning how to be parents together. Those early weeks were exhausting and beautiful. James was a good baby, healthy and strong, but he needed constant care. Preston found himself doing things he had never imagined. Changing soiled cloths, walking the floor at night to soothe crying, singing soft songs his mother had sung to him before she died. Grace nursed the baby and slowly regained her strength, and Preston marveled at her patience and natural maternal instincts. "You are a wonderful mother," he told her one night as she rocked James to sleep. "And you are a wonderful father," she replied. "I see the way you look at him, how gentle you are. That is love, Preston. That is what a father should be." Spring arrived, melting the snow and turning the ranch green again. Preston hired a young man from Trinidad named Daniel to help with the increased workload, so he could spend more time with Grace and James. The ranch was thriving, the cattle healthy, and Preston began to think about expanding further. On a warm May evening, as they sat on the porch watching James play on a blanket spread on the grass, Grace leaned her head on Preston's shoulder. "You remember the first night I came here?" she asked. "When you found me in the stable with Thunder?" "I remember. I thought you were a thief." She laughed. "And I thought you might shoot me. But then you offered me food and shelter and you changed my life." "You changed mine," Preston corrected. "You took a lonely, angry man and showed him what it meant to have a real home, full of love and laughter and purpose." "What did I whisper to Thunder that night?" Grace asked suddenly. "Do you remember asking me?" "I remember. You said it was just quiet words, that horses understand tone." "It was more than that." Grace sat up to look at him. "I told him that he was safe, that no one would hurt him anymore, that he could trust again. I said those words to him, but I was really saying them to myself. I needed to believe they were true." Preston felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Were they true?" "Yes, because of you. You made me safe. You helped me trust again. You gave me everything I thought I had lost forever. A home, a partner, a family." He kissed her then, long and deep, tasting the salt of tears, though he could not tell if they were hers or his. When they pulled apart, James was watching them with solemn eyes, and they both laughed. "Our son needs to learn that his parents are deeply in love," Preston said. "I think he already knows." As summer deepened, Preston and Grace fell into the rhythms of their life together. They worked the ranch side by side when James was napping or in the care of Daniel's wife, who had started coming by to help. They made plans for the future. More cattle, maybe horses to sell, eventually expanding the house to accommodate the larger family they both wanted. One afternoon in late July, Sheriff Tom Reeves rode out to the ranch. Preston's first thought was trouble, but Tom was smiling as he dismounted. "Heard you folks had a baby," Tom said. "Thought I would come out and offer congratulations. Also wanted to let you know that Wade Carson sold his ranch and left the territory. Seems the investigation damaged his reputation enough that he decided to start over somewhere else." Preston felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "He is really gone. Gone for good, looks like. You do not have to worry about him anymore." After Tom left, Preston found Grace in the garden with James. He told her the news and she wrapped her free arm around him, the baby between them. "It is really over," she said. "We are truly safe now." "We were always going to be safe," Preston replied. "I would never have let anything happen to you or James, but I am glad the threat is gone. Now we can just focus on building our life together." Years passed, marked by seasons and small miracles. When James was 3, Grace gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, who had her mother's green eyes and her father's quiet strength. 2 years after that came another son, Michael, who was loud and boisterous and filled the house with laughter. The ranch prospered. Preston's reputation for quality horses grew, and people came from as far as Denver to buy his animals. Grace's skill with the horses became legendary. She trained each one with patience and kindness, and they responded to her in ways that amazed everyone who saw it. Preston added rooms to the house, expanding it to accommodate their growing family. The original bedroom where he had slept alone for so many years became James's room. The storage room where Grace had spent her first night became Sarah's domain. They built a new master bedroom with a large bed and windows that looked out over the ranch Preston loved. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston took Grace up to a hill overlooking the property. The children were with Daniel's family for the afternoon, giving them rare time alone. They sat in the grass, watching the wind move through the valley below. "I was thinking about that first night again," Preston said. "About how close I came to sending you away." "Why did you not?" Grace asked. "You could have given me food and sent me on my way." "Why did you offer me a place to stay?" Preston considered the question. "Honestly, I think some part of me recognized you, not in the sense that we had met before, but in a deeper way. You were looking for a home, and I had a home that needed someone to make it whole. We fit together from the very beginning. I just did not realize it right away." "I knew," Grace said softly. "I knew that first night when you gave me food and did not ask for anything in return. I knew when you looked at me with respect instead of suspicion. I knew that you were someone special, someone I could trust. And the words you whispered to Thunder, about being safe and learning to trust again, did you come to believe them every single day? You kept those promises, Preston. You made me safe. You taught me to trust again. And you gave me a life more beautiful than anything I could have imagined." Preston pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I love you, Grace, more now than even that day I first said it, and I thought my heart would burst then. I love you too. You are my home, Preston Lyle. You always will be." They sat together as the sun moved across the sky, two people who had found each other in the wilderness and built something lasting and true. Below them, the ranch stretched out, a testament to their hard work and partnership. In the house, their children's rooms waited for laughter and games and bedtime stories. In the stable, horses stood in clean stalls, treated with the kindness that Grace had taught Preston was the only way. When they finally returned to the house to collect their children, James ran to them with a drawing he had made. "It is our family," he explained, showing them the simple figures he had drawn. A tall man, a woman with long hair, and 3 smaller figures between them. "We are all together." Preston ruffled his son's hair, looking at Grace over the boy's head. She was smiling, that same smile he had seen on their wedding day, full of love and contentment. "Yes," Preston said, "we are all together, and that is everything." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. The children grew, learning the rhythms of ranch life just as their parents had. James became an excellent horseman, patient and skilled like his mother. Sarah showed a talent for reading the weather and knowing what the land needed. Michael was fearless and energetic, always ready for the next adventure. Preston and Grace grew older together, their love deepening with each shared sunrise and sunset. There were hard times, droughts that tested their resources, illnesses that scared them, losses that brought tears. But they faced everything together, drawing strength from the partnership they had built. When Preston was 50 and Grace was 45, they sat on the porch one evening watching their 3 children work in the corral. James, now 22, was training a young stallion with the same gentle patience his mother had shown with Thunder all those years ago. Sarah, 19, was checking the fence line with a careful eye. Michael, 17, was supposed to be feeding the chickens but was instead playing with the ranch dogs. "They are good people," Grace said. "We raised good people." "We did," Preston agreed. "Because you taught them about kindness and I taught them about hard work. Together we gave them what we both needed when we were young, safety and love and a place to belong." Grace took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Do you ever regret it? The quiet life you had before I came along and complicated everything?" Preston turned to her, seeing the gray in her hair, the lines around her eyes, the beauty that had only grown with time. "I regret every day I lived before you. All those wasted years when I could have been loving you, building this life with you. The only thing I do not regret is being in that stable the night you came. That was the moment my real life began." "Mine too," Grace whispered. "Mine too." They had been lucky, Preston thought. Lucky that Grace had been desperate enough to enter a stranger's stable. Lucky that Preston had been kind enough to offer help. Lucky that they had both been brave enough to take a chance on love. But maybe it was not just luck. Maybe it was something deeper, something that had drawn them together across miles and hardships, 2 souls that were always meant to find each other. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Preston thought about the words Grace had whispered to Thunder that first night. She had promised safety and trust, and the chance to heal. She had kept those promises, not just to the horse but to Preston himself. She had taken a wounded, angry man and shown him that there was another way to live. And in return, he had given her everything he had: his love, his home, his life. The children came up to the house for supper, filling the rooms with noise and laughter. They ate together around the big table Preston had built, sharing stories of their day. After the meal, Sarah played the piano that Preston had bought her for her 16th birthday, and they all sang together, their voices blending in the warm lamplight. Later, when the children had gone to their rooms and the house was quiet, Preston and Grace retired to their bedroom. They lay in bed together, Grace's head on Preston's chest, his arms around her. "Thank you," Preston said into the darkness. "For what?" "For staying that first night. For taking a chance on me. For building this life with me. For loving me when I did not know how to love myself." Grace shifted so she could look at him. "You made it easy, Preston. You were always worth loving. You just needed someone to see it." He kissed her then, softly, reverently, trying to pour a lifetime of gratitude and love into that single moment. When they finally fell asleep, they were wrapped in each other's arms, 2 people who had found their way home. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Preston woke to find Grace already up, standing by the window looking out at the ranch. He came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Everything. How far we have come, how blessed we are. How grateful I am for every moment of this life we built together. Preston rested his chin on her shoulder. I am grateful too, every single day. They stood there together as the sun rose higher, warming the land. Below them, the ranch came to life. The children emerged from the house to begin their chores. The horses moved in the corral, healthy and strong. The cattle grazed in distant pastures. Everything they had worked for, everything they had dreamed of, was spread out before them. It had started with a woman in a stable, whispering words of comfort to a frightened horse. Those whispers had changed more than the animal's fear. They had changed Preston's life, opened his heart, and shown him that the future he had resigned himself to was not the only one possible. Grace had brought him hope and love and family, and in return, he had given her safety and partnership and a home. It was not a complicated love story. There were no grand gestures or dramatic rescues, at least not the kind told in dime novels. It was a love story built on quiet moments and daily kindnesses, on shared work and mutual respect, on the choice to keep choosing each other every single day. It was the story of two people who had both been lost, finding their way together, and it was a story that was far from over. Preston and Grace continued working the ranch for many more years, eventually passing more of the responsibility to their children. James took over most of the horse training, applying his mother's methods with great success. Sarah became the ranch's manager, her organizational skills and business acumen helping to expand their operation. Michael, despite his youthful wildness, became an expert cattleman with an instinct for the animals that served them well. When Preston was 60, he and Grace took a trip to Kansas, to the place where Grace had grown up. The ranch where she had spent her childhood had been divided and sold to multiple owners, but they found her father's grave and stood before it together. I wish he could have known you, Grace said, tears in her eyes. He would have loved you. He would have been so proud of what we built together. I wish I could have known him too, Preston replied, so I could thank him for teaching you everything that made you the woman I fell in love with. They returned to Colorado with renewed appreciation for how far they had come. The struggles of Grace's youth, the losses she had endured, had shaped her into someone strong and resilient. And Preston's lonely years before her arrival had taught him to value what he had been given, to never take for granted the love and family that filled his days. As they grew older, Preston and Grace began to slow down. They spent more time on the porch, watching the ranch continue without their constant supervision. They played with grandchildren, James having married a woman from Trinidad named Elizabeth and starting a family of his own. They took long walks together, holding hands like young lovers, reminiscing about all the years behind them. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to honor the couple who had become pillars of the community. There was food and music and dancing, and Preston found himself overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection. "You did this," he told Grace as they danced together. "You made me part of the community. Before you, I was just the strange, quiet rancher on the edge of town. You made me belong." "We did it together," Grace corrected. "Everything we have, we built together." That night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet, they sat on the porch one more time. The stars were brilliant overhead and the air was warm with summer. "Do you remember what I asked you that first morning?" Preston said. "After you had stayed the night, you asked if I had decided to stay. And you said you needed the work and that I seemed like an honest man." Grace laughed softly. "I was trying to sound practical. But the truth was, I had already decided to stay the moment you offered me food without expecting anything in return. I knew then that you were someone special." And I knew when I saw you with Thunder, the way you gentled him, the way he responded to you. I thought, this is someone who understands hurt and healing, someone who could maybe understand me, and I do. Grace squeezed his hand. We understood each other from the very beginning. That is why this worked. Preston brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. I love you, Grace Lyle. I have loved you for 30 years, and I will love you until my last breath. And beyond, Grace added. Whatever comes after this life, I believe we will find each other again. Some loves are too strong to end. They sat together in comfortable silence, two people who had built a lifetime together and were content with what they had created. Around them, the ranch settled into its nightly rhythms. In the house, their children and grandchildren slept safely. In the stable, horses rested in their stalls. In the pastures, cattle grazed under the starlight. It was everything they had worked for. Everything they had dreamed of during those early days when they were still learning to trust each other and trust the love growing between them. They had taken a chance on each other, and that chance had become a marriage, a family, a legacy. Preston thought about the young man he had been, angry and alone, convinced that solitude was the only way to survive. He thought about how wrong he had been, how much richer his life became when he opened his heart to Grace. She had not just changed his life. She had given him a life worth living. And Grace, for her part, thought about the desperate woman she had been, wandering alone after losing everything. She thought about how close she had come to giving up, and how finding Preston had saved her in ways that went beyond just physical safety. He had restored her faith in goodness, in the possibility of happiness, in the future. They had saved each other. That was the truth of their story. Not that one was the hero and the other the rescued, but that they had both been drowning and had found in each other a lifeline. They had pulled each other to shore and built a home on solid ground, a home that had sheltered not just them, but the family they created. As they finally rose to go inside for the night, Preston took one last look at the ranch spread out before them. This land, which had once been just a place to hide from the world, had become something sacred. It was where he had learned to love, where his children had been born, where he had discovered what it meant to truly live. "Come on," Grace said gently, tugging his hand. "Tomorrow is another day. The ranch will still be here in the morning." "I know," Preston replied. "I just wanted to remember this moment, this feeling of being completely at peace." "Then remember it," Grace said, smiling at him with the same warmth she had shown him 30 years ago. "And know that every moment we have together is one to remember." They went inside together, closing the door on another perfect day. And though neither of them knew how many more days they would have, they both knew that whatever time remained would be spent together, in love, in partnership, in the home they had built from nothing but hope and determination. The story of the quiet rancher and the woman he found tending his horses was a love story for the ages, not because it was dramatic or filled with grand romantic gestures, but because it was real. It was the story of two people choosing each other every day, working through hardships together, building something lasting and true. It was a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of partnership, and the healing nature of love. And it was a story that would continue for as long as they both drew breath, and beyond, in the children they raised and the legacy they left behind. Because the best love stories do not end. They grow and expand, touching other lives, creating ripples that spread far beyond the original couple. Preston and Grace Lyle had found each other in a stable in 1878, two lost souls seeking something they could not quite name. And in finding each other, they had found everything: home, family, purpose, and a love that would endure for all time. That was the story. That was the miracle. That was the life they built together. one quiet moment at a time, until those moments added up to a lifetime of joy. And every evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Preston would think about Grace's words to Thunder that first night. She had promised safety and trust and healing. She had kept those promises, not just to the horse, but to him, to their children, to everyone whose life she touched. And Preston had kept his own silent promises, to protect her, to cherish her, to build a life worthy of the gift she had given him when she chose to stay. Together, they had created something beautiful from the ashes of their separate losses. Together, they had proven that it is never too late for love, never too late to start over, never too late to find the home your heart has been seeking. As the years continued to roll by, Preston and Grace remained devoted to each other and to the life they had built. They watched as James expanded the horse breeding operation, as Sarah married a merchant from Trinidad and balanced family life with helping manage the ranch, as Michael eventually settled down with a spirited woman who matched his energy and gave him 4 children in quick succession. They celebrated births and mourned deaths, weathered storms and droughts, saw good years and lean years. Through it all, they remained each other's constant, the steady presence that made everything else manageable. On the hardest days, they had each other. On the best days, they shared the joy. And on the ordinary days that made up most of life, they found contentment in simple things. Morning coffee together, working side by side, evening conversations on the porch. When Preston was 72, he suffered a fall from a horse and injured his back badly. For weeks he was confined to bed, frustrated by his inability to work. Grace tended him with patient devotion, and it was during this time that Preston truly understood how much their roles had evolved over the years. She had started as someone he protected and provided for, but she had become his equal partner in every way, and now she was the one caring for him. "I am sorry," he told her one evening as she helped him sit up to eat. "I am supposed to be taking care of you, not the other way around." "Preston Lyle," Grace said firmly, "we take care of each other. That has always been our way. You have taken care of me 1,000 times over the years. Now let me take care of you." He recovered slowly, and though he was never quite as strong as he had been, he regained enough function to return to light work around the ranch. He learned to accept help from his sons and hired hands, learning the humility that comes with aging. And through it all, Grace was beside him, encouraging him, believing in him, loving him. When Preston turned 75, the family organized another celebration. This time, it was not just for an anniversary but for Preston himself, a recognition of the life he had lived and the family he had raised. As he sat in the chair his sons had carried out to the yard for him, watching 3 generations of his family eat and laugh and celebrate together, Preston felt a peace so deep it brought tears to his eyes. Grace sat beside him, her hair now completely white, her face lined with age but still beautiful to him. She took his hand and squeezed it gently. "This is what it was all for," she said quietly. "This is what we built." "And it is perfect," Preston replied. Every hardship, every struggle, every moment of doubt was worth it to arrive at this. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the ranch, Preston's oldest grandson, James's boy, came to sit at his feet. "Grandfather," the boy said, "tell me again how you and grandmother met." Preston smiled, glancing at Grace, who nodded encouragingly. How many times had they told this story? And yet it never got old, never lost its power. "Well," Preston began, his voice carrying across the yard, drawing the attention of his children and grandchildren. "It was a summer evening in 1878, and I was coming back to my ranch after a day of work. I saw someone in my stable, and when I went to investigate, I found your grandmother standing beside my horse Thunder, whispering to him." "What did she say?" the boy asked, though he had heard this story before. Grace answered this time, her voice soft but clear. "I told him he was safe, that he could trust again, that no one would hurt him any more. And then I looked up and saw your grandfather standing there, and somehow I knew that those words were meant for both of us." "And then what happened?" another grandchild called out. "Then grandfather hired grandmother to work on the ranch," James said, picking up the familiar story, "and they fell in love." "It was not quite that simple," Preston said with a laugh. "Your grandmother made me work for it, but yes, we fell in love, and we have been in love every day since." "That is the kind of love I want," Sarah's oldest daughter said wistfully. "Then look for someone who sees you," Grace advised. "Really sees you, not just what they want you to be. Look for someone who respects your strength and forgives your weaknesses. Look for someone you can build a life with, not just share a few pretty moments. That is lasting love." The party continued into the evening, and Preston felt surrounded by the evidence of the life he and Grace had created. These children and grandchildren, this land they had tended for decades, this community they had become part of, all of it stemmed from that one evening when a desperate woman entered his stable, and he chose kindness over suspicion. One decision. That was all it took to change everything. One moment of compassion had led to this entire life, this entire family. It was humbling to think about how easily it could have gone differently, how he almost sent her away that first night. But he had not. He had offered her food and shelter, and she had stayed. And everything else had followed from that choice. As the guests finally departed, and the family helped clean up, Preston and Grace made their way slowly to the porch. Moving was harder now for both of them, their bodies showing the wear of 70-plus years of life and decades of hard work. But they made it, settling into the chairs that had been their evening refuge for so many years. "I am tired," Grace admitted, leaning her head back. "Me too," Preston said, "but it is a good tired." They sat in silence, holding hands, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The ranch was quiet now, settled for the night. In the house behind them, their children and grandchildren were getting ready for bed, the younger ones already asleep after the excitement of the day. "Preston," Grace said eventually, "I want you to know something." "What is that?" "If I had to do it all over again, if I could go back to that night and choose differently, I would make the same choice every time. I would choose you. I would choose this life. I would choose all of it, the hard parts and the beautiful parts, because it led me here. To this moment with you." Preston felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I would choose the same. Every time I would choose you." They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from decades of companionship. They had said everything that needed saying over the years. Now they could simply be together, drawing comfort from each other's presence. Eventually, the chill in the air drove them inside. They prepared for bed slowly, helping each other with buttons and laces that were harder to manage with arthritic fingers. They climbed into bed together, and Grace nestled against Preston's side the way she had every night for nearly 40 years. "Good night, my love," she whispered. "Good night, Grace. I love you. I love you too. Always." They drifted off to sleep, two lives perfectly intertwined, two hearts that had beaten as one for so long that they had forgotten what it was like to be separate. They were home, in the deepest sense of the word. They were exactly where they belonged. And so the story of the quiet rancher and the woman he found tending his horses reached its natural, peaceful conclusion. Not with drama or tragedy, but with contentment and fulfillment. They had lived a full life together, raised a family, built a legacy. They had loved each other through young passion and middle-aged partnership, and now into the deep, abiding devotion of old age. Their story would be told by their grandchildren to their great-grandchildren. It would become family legend, the romantic tale of how the family began. And each telling would reinforce the lessons Grace and Preston had learned and tried to pass on. That kindness matters. That love is a choice you make every day. That home is not a place but a person. That the best things in life come from taking chances on each other. The ranch would continue for generations, passed down from parent to child, a living testament to what Preston and Grace built together. The horses would still be trained with Grace's gentle methods. The land would still be worked with Preston's diligent care. And every evening, someone would sit on that porch and watch the sunset, remembering the two people who first sat there together and dreamed of the future. It was a love story for the ages, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Two imperfect people who found each other at exactly the right moment and chose to build something beautiful together. Two wounded souls who healed each other with patience and devotion. Two lonely hearts that found their home in each other. And as Preston and Grace slept peacefully in each other's arms on that warm summer night, surrounded by family and wrapped in love, their story came full circle. From that first whispered promise in a stable to this final contented peace, everything had led to this moment. Everything had been worth it. The quiet rancher had found his soulmate, and together they had lived a life beyond their wildest dreams. The end had arrived, but it was not sad. It was simply complete. Their story had been told, their love had been proven, their legacy had been secured. And that was enough. That was everything. That was the happy ending they had worked for and earned and absolutely deserved.